Before I begin, I've laid some applications for Kairos closing service at Hutchins, which will take place at the end of February. The Kairos team consists of 50 people or so who will be going inside and a number of people who are outside cooking and preparing. But of those people, there are at least 5 of us from here going. David Spratly, David Burris, myself, and Tim Greggs. And Lisa Burris is one of the people in the kitchen for the weekend. So about 1/10 of the team going this time is representing First United Methodist Church of Mesquite. We're inviting you to be a part of that Sunday afternoon closing event when you get to hear some of the inmates who have been a part of the weekend tell about what they've seen, what they've heard, what they've been able to feel about the Jesus many of them have heard about all their lives but are now discovering in a new way. It's a tremendously moving time. The sheet here tells you exactly the kind of clothes you would need to wear and what you can't take in and all the rules. But we want to make a special invitation to each and every one of you to be a part of that. Today I want to begin talking by a little bit about the awakening I had during the 8 years that we were in Jacksboro. We'd lived in town for 20 years before that, and suddenly we were here out on the prairie. But it was so much more than grassland and ranches, as we found out. We were in a part of the state of Texas which is called the Pennsylvanian geological area, because it duplicates what was found in western Pennsylvania once upon a time in terms of rock formations, in terms of fossils that could be found, but mainly, of course, in terms of the oil and the gas which was underneath that large shale area, which we now know as the Barnett Shale, and which was a lot bigger than anybody thought it was at one time. But we would walk there almost daily with the dogs across a big dam and up to hills that were surrounding it, and your feet would literally crunch over fossils, cephalopods, little tiny squid shells, looked like squids, ammonites, which were also a form of cephalopod, both of which went extinct at exactly the same time that the dinosaurs went extinct. And, of course, the reason that those cephalopods and clams, lots of clam, oyster fossils around, coral, were there because the ocean that lapped up into Texas was out there. And for 300 million years, that Paleozoic era, right in the middle of the long Paleozoic era, which goes back 300 million years, is the Carboniferous era, which began about 190 million years ago. And the Carboniferous era was very, very green, all around that ocean's edge. Forests of green, ferns, shrubs, little plants that grew underneath, billions of these plants. This is a tiny part of a piece of bamboo. We'll call it cane of some sort. When cane would die, it would fall down, and the inside of the cane would rot out and be filled with sand or mud and harden. That preserved the outside, and you can still see if you look closely at this, of the striations, just like a piece of bamboo, just like a piece of cane now. But among these millions of cane trees, probably about 30 feet high. This one would have been a little bit shorter because they would grow to be about 10 inches in diameter. As they died, as the incredible wildlife which came into being and prospered during the Carboniferous era began to die off, starting around 66 million years ago when the asteroid hit down where the Gulf of Mexico is and sent that cloud of dust and dirt around the Earth for several years, causing all the big animals to die off. But a combination of the big animals and all of this greenery, which died at that time, and as the oceans then shifted because of this big new hole down there, that's eventually what caused oil to be, and gas, and the hard pressure that caused the shale to be. We're driving around, all of us, on other forms of Carboniferous era fossils. We burn Carboniferous fossil gas when we use our gas, when we use natural gas. I came to be aware of connections in Jacksboro, in Jack County, in rural Texas, in a way that I simply had not been before. Watching the birds, watching the wildlife, watching the vultures close up from here to where the Robertsons are sitting, watching their chicks, which were the size of roosters, learning to fly, watching the parents feed them from carcasses, dead skunks along the road, armadillos, watching all that happening and becoming and understanding myself as a part of exactly the same system they are, dependent upon exactly the same sun, the same air, the same soil, the same ground, and became aware of that great connectedness. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. We can divide times and eras into periods and spaces and spans as a way of speaking about them scientifically with some kind of logic. But in reality, time is really more like a huge and vast ocean, an endless ocean of waves and movements and change, with and without form, always the same, but always changing. We are connected to those parts of time represented here as we are to connections we have in this time. We are dependent upon that time as we are this time. All that we do, all that we are, is connected within that vastness. The first writers of Genesis put the wonder that they experienced into the best form possible, using words that they could muster and put together at that time with what they could know. And the order of creation, as they wrote about it, is remarkably insightful. An empty mass, unformed, it says. And a wind from God swept over it all. And I'm perfectly willing to call that wind, that Spirit, that Christ. Spirit and wind, of course, are the same word, pneumos, ruach. John 1, he was with God in the beginning. And the Word, the master blueprint of everything, the foundation of all that is, was God. All things came into being through him. What has come into being through him was life. That's why I'm perfectly willing to call that Spirit, that breath of God, the Christ. First there was light, then earth, then sky, then waters, then earth, vegetation, animal life, and finally humans. Genesis 1:24. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind. Again, domestic cattle and wild animals. And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every other creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." That verse right there at the end has gotten us in a lot of trouble by thinking that something written 3,000 years ago will apply for eternity. But that's another sermon someday. God said, "See, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I've given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that he'd made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. The great connectedness of everything to everything else. Getting from what was described in Genesis there to what the world has become indicates that everything did not come to a halt on that seventh day when it says God rested. Because creation was not a one-time event. Creation continues. It is continuing. It will always be continuing and new. We can see now, because of the Cassini and the Hubble telescopes and other land-based telescopes, we can see the births and the deaths of galaxies. We know now what the writers of Genesis couldn't possibly have known, that there are not just some galaxies up there. There are billions of galaxies like our Milky Way. We know that life changes, adapts, evolves right here around us. In the ocean of time, there are always new seasons, new changes. Some cataclysmic, like the one which eventually destroyed the large dinosaurs 66 million years ago. Or the cataclysmic events like the plagues, the bacteria, the virus that our ancient ancestors, well, not so ancient, Middle Ages, ancestors suffered through and died of. Many more of those changes, however, are very, very subtle, unseen to the naked eye. New bacteria, new viruses, or the so slow breakdown of red-hot molten lava into tillable, fertile soil. We've also learned how to manipulate and influence that change. And sometimes that ability to manipulate is very, very good. I'd rather be walking every evening a retriever and a terrier than I would two wolves. But that's human manipulation has brought dogs into being from those original wolves. And I love bananas, but not those bananas that have been unmanipulated by humans. They're tiny little things, hard, and they're only eaten by those most hungry of sub-Saharan dwellers. But we've also manipulated so many parts of nature in not so good, even tragic ways. Unknowingly sometimes, but often with dollar bills intentionally blinding us. We've cut down and are cutting down 10,000-year-old forests and plowed under millions of acres, which were in fact in place for millions of years, even longer than these plants were. We've cut them down so that we could raise corn and other things. But in so doing, we produced a very, very humanly caused dust bowl, a tragedy of continuing human error. We eat palm oil by the shipload. Look at your ingredients labels. And by doing so, we cause forests around the world, rainforests, old-growth rainforests around the world, to be cleared for the more profitable, much more profitable palm tree. Meanwhile, orangutans and antelope flee and then die or are killed as they are gathered for their bush meat, as it's called. Not to mention anything about all the millions of tons of green, air-cleaning leaves and green growth and oxygen-generating forests which are gone at the same time. That's happening today, right now, this morning, this moment. Or, bring it closer home, we keep those beautiful, large, verdant lawns green in America with 90 million pounds of fertilizer and 78 million pounds of insecticide yearly. That's just in this country. And we use 36 million lawnmowers to keep those lawns tidy, each of which produces as much pollution in 1 hour as a car does driving 100 miles. In fact, American lawns placed side by side would equal an area the size of Virginia. And they demand water, 10,000 gallons per year on a residential lawn on average, 10,000 gallons on average. And most of that water is gotten from aquifers and reservoirs, exactly like it is here in Mesquite. And you know what? At this point in the continuing drought here in Texas and throughout the Midwest, and now obviously in the West, we see California burning right now. In that drought, we're only 2 months away of no rain from level 4 water restrictions. That's no outside watering, no car washes, no nurseries, no gardens being watered. Drive by any area reservoir in North Texas and see how close we are. It's both amazing and frightening how low the reservoirs are. And on and on and on. Those are just a few examples of so many things where we've manipulated and in so doing made very poor choices. So what do? How do we learn again about being kind to creation? Being kind to our planet is an expression of love for our neighbors, all of our neighbors, the ones across the street and the orangutans, the orcas, and the oysters, which, by the way, we dare not eat straight from the ocean anymore. The tasteless oysters that we now must eat are raised on farms because we can't eat them as safely anymore because of all that fertilizer and insecticide which now runs along the southern edge of the United States, is filtered through a wild oyster. Most importantly, of course, being kind to creation is being kind to our closest, most loved neighbor, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, generations yet to be born. So what do we do? What do? From the book of Job, God, talking from a whirlwind to Job, says, ask the animals, and they'll teach you. Or the birds in the sky, and they'll tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Or let the fish in the sea inform you. That's what we do. Whatever we do, whatever scientific, practical, necessary work we do to make things better, begins with the fundamentals of how creation already works and has worked since that Spirit hovered over the waters. That's what we do. Jesus, the human embodiment of the Christ, the light of all humankind, said it this way: do not worry. Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they are? And can any of you, by worrying a single hour, add an hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. What do we do? How do we be kind to creation? First, we observe how creation takes care of itself. We listen to the eternal symphony and once again retune ourselves within its holy harmony. We study the birds and the lilies. Where they flourish, we flourish. Where they suffer, we will suffer very soon thereafter. You've seen gardening things happening around the church here. Tending the garden of continuing creation has already begun. This will be the first complete 12-month year of the vegetable garden back here. The first full year where the lawn has been removed, the soil reaffirmed and renewed with compost and mulch and drip irrigation. Drip irrigation, where not a single drop of water is wasted or evaporated away. This year we'll see some fresh vegetables, chemical-free vegetables in here for sale to raise money for other events, or given away to those in need, or taken to Shared Life, where some other community gardens take their produce, or down to the Austin Street Shelter. You can learn how to do that. All of us can learn how to do that. There are volunteers here among you right now who feel gardening as a mission, as a passion. The Academy kids are participating too, digging, planting, harvesting, then eating. That's what the vegetable garden out here is, a model and a teaching tool. Almost everybody has a 4x4 plat or area in their sunny part of their backyard that can be turned into a place where fresh food is grown. It doesn't come automatically. It takes a little bit of work, but the joy of eating a tomato, warm tomato right off the vine, or to go out there and pick beans and just eat them, or okra like I did last fall. Even people in apartments have a window where you can put a pot and grow tomatoes. You've also seen the normal status quo, everybody does it, shrubs out here being replaced by native plants, minimal water-needing plants, minimal labor-needing plants. Again, the soil is being turned back into soil that is a duplicate of the soil found on forest floors, where the only fertilizer is leaves and mulch. And the incredible invisible variety of things unseen under the ground gets a chance to flourish and be renewed. Did you see the butterflies last fall there by the dozens during some days in October, stopping from their areas in Pennsylvania and New England on their way back home to Mexico? Have you seen the Academy kids out here during the day ever digging and planting and then eating that food, which they helped to create? Because that's what our role is in following Christ, to be co-creators of Christ, of a new creation, as Jesus revealed it to us. Just as our grandparents did, tending the garden once upon a time. We're soon going to be collecting some of the rainwater that falls off the roofs here, so that when there is no rain, we can minimally water these native plants out here. It doesn't take a whole lot, but it does take some. And we don't want to have to buy city water to do that. We don't have to want to use city water on these flowers because that city water is going to be needed, that reservoir water is going to be needed elsewhere. Already we're being pointed to by others within the water department, even here in town, as a model for making our church earth-kind and water-wise, per the recommendations of Texas A&M's Extension Service. And we will continue to be an example in expanding ways over the next years for other churches, other businesses, and other residences. In doing so, we are being kind to creation. And by being kind to creation, we are acting in love for our neighbors, and thus, as Jesus said, demonstrating our love for God. Finally, this piece of cane again. This one's probably approximately 300 million years ago when this was green and growing. But until 140 million years ago, so for 150 million years of plants like this proliferating around the earth, until 140 million years ago, there was not a single flower anywhere. It was all green, it was all leaves, it was all various green-colored kinds of fruit, green and brown-colored fruit. Somewhere, somehow, a flower appeared. It probably didn't last long, but other flowers then began to appear. And all kinds of new fertilization, all kinds of new fruit became evident, and soon flowers proliferated around the world. You have some in your bulletins right now, potential flowers. I think of what's happening right now on earth as a new flowering, as we realize we cannot continue to do the things we have done, cutting down forests, plowing up wherever we want to, blowing the tops off of mountains. That can't continue. So I think of what we do in our kindness to creation as a new flowering of the world. A new way to follow Jesus the Christ into a new creation. Amen.